Continuing to summarize a number of my previous topics, originating in self-help into the idea of personal responsibility, it seems reasonable to ask, as we have bought into these ideas decade after decade, directly through the use of our wallets and purses, have our lives actually improved in the United States? And again, I will reiterate that the global self-help market, currently valued at some $40 billion US, is projected to be valued at anywhere between 80 and 90 billion US within 10 years. One obvious dismissal some people will make of this question is that people just do not understand the types of ideas propagated in the self-help literature enough, or that people just do not embrace them to their fullest. My counterpoint, however, is that these ideas are focused on the individual, as if he or she is separated off by themselves. Even worse, much of this literature teaches how individuals can get what they want out of others by manipulating the people around them, or even emphasizes that the individual does not really need anyone else besides themselves to thrive. And this, to my mind, in an already narcissistic culture, is the key problem. People need each other. People need love, support, and mentorship in their life. Few people can thrive without others, although a growing number of people are willing to lie to themselves in this regard because of failed past friendships and relationships. And in a culture that has been dividing people at every turn for decades, or as I have said before, has atomized the individual to the point of oblivion, these types of messages have no place in our culture and should be stamped out if we want to survive as a people or a nation. Indeed, and I want to state this clearly, I believe these ideas have, at least in large part, been formulated and specifically pushed to divide people against each other so that we will be weak and easily influenced. Regardless, in a culture where the individual is pushed towards self-obsession, instant gratification, and narcissism, decades of this type of messaging seem far more a part of the problem than a part of the solution. I also know that some people will have qualms with the mere mention of pulling the individual back into some form of community and will argue that we are and have always been an individualistic culture. I, however, would argue we have long passed the point of being an individualistic culture. When we were an individualistic culture, we had stable communities in which people operated and to some extent could rely on. Now we are an atomistic culture with every person constantly uprooting themselves and separating themselves off. The comparisons between the U.S. as being an individualistic culture and any other region of the world being collective is at this point nonsensical. From a historical perspective, when the founders of our country spoke of the individual, they were speaking as people and about people who are part of families and communities. Again, not as individuals separated off in isolation. To my mind, anyone who wants to place the blame of our cultural issues at the foot of individualism itself needs to face the reality that the idea has been perverted into something inhuman. Indeed, I would argue that conformity is far more to blame. Moving on, any time I address a topic from a Christian perspective, I normally look through the lens of Protestantism. But now, to speak in Christian terms on the matter, if you believe Scripture holds any value beyond being just a collection of myths and legends, the message of Christ is not individualized. We brought sin into the world. We all live in sin, and Christ died for the sins of us all. This is the message of Scripture. We have an individual choice to accept this, but that is as far as it goes for Scripture being individualized. But we also live in a time where popular Christianity teaches the idea that Christ has a personal plan for you, twisting Scripture from the Old Testament prophets, literally aimed at an entire nation, to apply it to the individual as separated off by themselves. Jeremiah 29, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. This is addressed to the nation of Israel, not you as an individual. The messaging of popular Christianity is so backwards that the idea of us having a personal relationship with Him through which we can love ourselves is emphasized over Christ's own commandment that we love each other. Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. John 13, verses 34 through 35. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so must you love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And the disciples and apostles echo this same sentiment throughout the rest of the New Testament. There is nothing individualized here. And in short, we have a popular Christianity which refuses to uphold basic tenets of Scripture, tenets we could actually unite around as people or as communities. Instead, this form of Christianity conforms to that same atomistic cultural messaging of personal responsibility and ultimately of self-obsession. The same type of culture which is so incapable of acknowledging unhappiness. The same type of culture that will kick its people to the curb until they develop problems for which we will then push them to seek out professional help through the psychiatric or therapeutic state. And to juxtapose Scripture to the idea that you are just responsible for you, that cause and effect in the world can be reduced to you just being responsible for your own actions, that the choices of others do not have any real impact on you, that if they do, you are just guilty of choosing not to do X, Y, or Z. That if someone else falls, you just get to point the finger and tell them they just need to be responsible for their own actions. Well, there is also the following. Ecclesiastes, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. On a cultural level, we have become incapable of this. Perhaps it is time we return to actual Christian principles to try and forge a culture in which everything in every way, shape, and form is not always about you and your own happiness. A world in which your actions have consequences beyond just you. And that is all for now. I hope to see you next time.